Welcome to another episode of Civic Cipher. I'm your host, Ramses Ja.
Okay, so do I just say like what my name is right there, or do I? Because you know how sometimes people don't.
No,
okay, my name is Q Ward. Sometimes I like to explain to people like the how or the why.
Hey, I think they need to know, man. It's on your birth certificate.
You know?
All right, that'll work.
My mom named me Quinton. People don't be wanting to say Quinton, so they call me Quentin, which is not my name at all. So then I shortened it to Q. But then when I introduce myself as Q, they say, well, what's your whole name? And then I end up in this, you know what I mean?
Yeah, man. That's
and I don't feel like doing that every time. I'm sorry, y'all, but you know.
You're not Tarantino. You're different. But yeah, I get it. No, I've heard it. And we're here to talk to you about the goings on in Black America in the past week. And rather unfortunately, there's a lot to talk about. But, you know, starting this week, we're going to start incorporating some positive elements into the show as well. We want to end on a high because, you know, there's been a lot of talk about, you know, protecting our mental health and so forth. And, you know, understanding that we have a job to do. And having these long form conversations about, you know, the state of Black America and, you know, what it is we need to be cognizant of and, you know, how to empower allies of Black and brown people. You know, after diving into this, you know, day in and day out, we recognize it can be very taxing. You know, when we do recognize that, you know, we, Q and I, are not the sole source of information that makes its way to you, the listener. And so, you know, we're going to try to incorporate some things that make this a little bit more digestible so that we can also enjoy ourselves. I don't think that, you know, I said this recently. I was at a rally, protest in Phoenix. And I said this to the crowd that was there. I don't think that we're just born to die. I don't think we're born to suffer. I think that we are entitled to some happiness, even though, you know, we have some challenges, you know, and so it's in that spirit that I want to incorporate some positivity. So stay tuned, because a little later on in the show, hopefully we'll be able to peel back some layers.
And you guys can actually help us with this. Sure. We want to name a segment and make sure that every show we include some positivity, because as taxing as it, you know, might be to you guys to hear some of the stuff that we have a responsibility to talk about. It's 10 times that for us, you know, digesting and going through and
talking
trying
about
to
it.
figure out which topics have priority, I guess, and what we're going to talk about every week. It can be mentally and emotionally exhausting for all of us. So we have to make sure that we bring some light and some jump start to the show every week. So we want to name a segment. If you have ideas, send them to us.
Yeah.
At Civic Cipher everywhere.
Absolutely. We'd love to hear from you for that and for anything else. And speaking of which, we've gotten recently a lot of articles sent our way from listeners. And just to kind of keep us in the loop of things that are going on in different cities around the country. And so, you know, last week we left some, we couldn't get to everything. And so we're going to try to get through as much of this as possible. So forgive us if we don't spend as much time on each one. But I just do think that some of these things are worth discussing and peeling back some layers and just kind of, you know, we're your friends. So if you're an ally, you know, just kind of having some perspective. And of course, if you're Black yourself, then you understand it very well. And, you know, I say it quite a bit. We're going to have our therapy together. So first up, I got a video this week from this one. I think came from our producer. Shout out DJ Swirl one time. So there's a lady in North Carolina. This video went viral, so you might have seen it yourself.
Yeah.
A lady in North Carolina. She's an older white lady. She says she was in her 70s, if I'm not mistaken. I believe she was at a restaurant or at a store or something like that. What happens is there's some Black folks in there, Black women, and they're having a good time and you know, whatever.
Which they're not allowed to do. I don't know if you. It's in the pamphlet.
according to this lady.
They give out a pamphlet. It's in there. I think it's like the third. If you fold it open, it's not the middle one, but it's the third Y'all can't see me, but the third section in the pamphlet, when you fold, it's 4 of them. It folds into a single one, and the third one, I think the second paragraph down, it says black women specifically cannot have fun at the restaurant.
Well, this lady certainly felt that way, and you know, if you think back in your life, all of us, this happened to me the other day. I was at a restaurant called Aho Owls. And there was a group of people there. It was actually 2 different groups. I'm there with a business partner of mine, shout out Sinbad. But we're sitting there talking. We're having lunch, as we do. And there was a couple of women, I think, and a man. And one of the women was being so loud. These were not black people. And then there was another table of people that were very vulgar with their language. Also white folks, you know. And so, you know, the same as I know that there are just types of people that are loud, that are have really bombastic, you know, just very loud energy. And that is true regardless of what race they are. You know, sometimes those people are black, but obviously in all of our experience, not just mine, sometimes those people are whatever color God chose to paint them. You know, that's more of a reflection of their personality than their race, in my belief. But this lady in North Carolina, we're not saying her name because we don't think that it really matters. We don't want to make heroes out of these people. But she ultimately became very frustrated. She excused her frustration by saying that she suffered from anxiety, I think, which is, any excuse is really lame, because if you reach, as she did, toward, you know, using racial slurs, which is the most basic form of expression. In my belief, profanity is the most basic form of expression, but racial slurs has got to be 3-4 levels below that even. It means you got really nothing. It's like schoolyard stuff. It shows a complete lack of intellect, in my belief, in my estimation. But, you know, she called these women the N-word. And of course, the women and everyone else in that room was taken aback by that, because it's such a condemnation. And, you know, we've talked about this on the show, what it feels like to hear that word from someone who is not black, from someone off of the lips of someone where it's not just an attack on you, it's an attack on everyone who came before you, who wore the color that you wear, whose bodies are buried in the ground on this land, who maybe that was the last word they ever heard in their life. And the heartbreak and the anger, I think that black people are allowed to be angry too, and that word certainly carries a lot of that with it. The anger that you feel with that is just something that, you know, words, we give words power, but black folks, we know that word exists only to condemn us specifically.
Yeah, and it's the interesting thing is that even in heated moments where there's already raised levels of where people's have started to raise their voice and they've started to curse, and the temperature has clearly changed in a room when it's turned into an argument and almost a fight. When that word is inserted, you can see both sides of the situation change
very much.
Even if they were already being disrespectful or already shouting, already on the verge of a fight, when that word is inserted, even in the video we're talking about, they're already kind of mouthing at each other. But once the lady says that, it changes the temperature of everyone in the room. People involved, people not involved. Like, everyone understands, oh, this just turned into something else.
Yeah, this is
this is not just a lady that's upset. This is also a lady that's, let's very plainly say, racist. And to people who are otherwise not, it always makes everybody kind of pause. Even the person most angered by it has to process it for a second. The reaction isn't,
hear that?
Yeah, the reaction isn't instant. It's like, it's jarring. Even when we watched the video together and it was blurted out.
Yeah, it was like, ooh.
Yeah, it's still,
ooh, she went
it
there.
Still stung a little bit, man.
So here's the thing about that. There's, you know, people who are willing to like you might, if especially if you're not black, you might imagine what the height of disrespect is, you know. And I feel like that if you're not black, you wouldn't be able to really understand how high that word is on the disrespect totem. Like for someone to, like it's like on par with someone spitting in your face and then standing there trying to hold your gaze, like just staring you down. Like, I'm gonna spit in your face and I'm gonna stare at you. Like that level of disrespect, like really? So one of us has to die now because I'm not gonna, like, you think that's cool, you know? And I recognize that it's a word, and it, you know, words only have the power that we assign to them. But I wanted to talk about that for a second while we're on this. So, you know, if you're listening, you might think to yourself, well, obviously this lady had nothing else. Cognitively, intellectually, she had nothing else. This lady's 1 million years old. She's out of her depth. She's going full Karen. She's allergic to anybody of any other race having any fun. And if it causes her to be slightly uncomfortable, which is consistent with quote unquote Karen behavior, why even give it the dignity that it has so far? And I think that one thing that we have to examine when it comes to these sorts of occurrences is that if those women were not black, let's say there were a group of white women and they were being just as loud, right? Just as obnoxious, quote unquote, if that's what this Karen is saying was happening in her estimation. But these women were white. This lady would have never used that word. The word only exists for black people. And the thing is, in no way is it singular. It's a condemnation of a whole race of people.
I'd argue she would have never even been annoyed or bothered.
Of course. But I'm trying to, you know, of course not. Yeah, this is purely, you know, if someone is brown, if someone is black, if someone doesn't look like you and you don't feel connected to the fun that they're having, and it somehow inconveniences you or something like that, you know, Karens are of all the human beings on planet Earth, that Karens are the ones that are the most upset, the most inconvenienced, and the most likely to get up and try to do something about it, right? With their complete lack of testosterone, really put themselves in the middle of a predicament where, you know, if anything went beyond just words, they're really not equipped to really engage on that level, but they've been so empowered by and fortified by the cultural, you know, optics and their position in society that they feel like, well, everybody needs to do everything I say or else. If the police show up, they're going to automatically be on my side. And so this is why you get this behavior. But I want to share a brief story. Once upon a time, I had a friend named Jared. And Jared and we talked, we hung out, you know, he was a friend of a friend, but, you know, they lived together as roommates, and I was always over at that friend's house, right? And Jared was super cool, man. He was one of those guys that, you know, he was into basketball, he was into hip hop, he was, you know, one of those guys, but he, you know, those people that are not quite cool, but just like kind of close because, you know, hey man, I got the new Master P album. You know, this was a while back, you know, for those that don't know anything about Master P, is an old rapper. Anyway, so once upon a time, Jared said something. He said, so I remember Shaquille O'Neal had done something that he didn't agree with, whatever it was. And he said, man, Shaq is really stupid. Shaq is one of those guys that I think it's okay if you use the N-word when you describe Shaq.
Ooh-wee.
And he said it just like that. He didn't actually say the word. He said, quote, the N-word, right? But he said it to me, and I reacted just like you. Whoa, right? And he's like, well, you know, he's just so stupid. He just does it on the third. And I was like, well, listen, man, hold on. Let me explain something to you. And our relationship changed after that because there was some pushback. You know, I tried to meet him where he was and educate him because a lot of folks really need that. You know, they don't know. And I try to leave some room for forgiveness. That's my MO. Sue me if you don't like it. But I think that we're going to have to be here as brothers and sisters. We just need to teach each other how to love each other. That's just my belief. So when that first happened, the way our conversation went was, hey, Jared, so if you wouldn't say that about someone who's white, then you're only saying that word because he's black. That means that that word is a word for black people. And you know what that word means? It's like, yeah, of course. I was like, I'm black too. He's like, well, of course, I'm not talking about you. I'm like, but that's a word that if you say it, it's a word that as a race has been very hurtful to us. And if you use it, you can't pick and choose. You know, you can't just say, okay, this person is, but these people aren't. You know, it doesn't work that way. You know, this is a condemnation of a race of people. This is how the word was used. This is how the word was instilled. Look at the literature. Go back. You can see for yourself. Yeah, I'm not going to say it because we're on the radio and the FCC kind of polices what we say, but you know, you can see all the documents, N-words for sale, you know, bucks, you know, that you know, you could go and purchase. You know, this is the way that it was used. So you can't then go and say, well, Shaq is one, but you're not, because that's not the way the word was intended. So if you're going to use this word, understand the gravity of it. Understand that this is something that is going to affect everybody who is black, and they're going to hear it and have some visceral reaction to it. It's a very hurtful thing to hear.
And that's without you even pushing back on the idea that what he was saying was false on his face.
Sure, of course.
That Shaq's not just some stupid N-word.
No. At no point is that word ever necessary to describe a human being's behavior. And if you do, you describe that specific human being. You don't use a word that's ascribed to a race of people. That's like me saying, okay, well, this one person is Native American, but you know, and like somehow that there's only one. No, that's a word that has been historically used to describe a race of people in a very unflattering way, with specific emphasis on our cognition.
Yeah, and that's his use of that word is everything we need to know about why he thought Shaq was stupid. There's no, he didn't have any evidence to point to that.
No, that's
right? So it's how he feels about
one thing that Shaquille O'Neal did in his life that upset him, and he thought that was the go-to. And so much like this lady in North Carolina, you know, when she reaches for it, you know, people that look at the video are like, oh my gosh, why would you even, like, just let this old lady go home and die somewhere? Well, no, it's not that simple. I wish it was, because I look at it and my first mind is, okay, how does this look to white allies? Because I have to talk about it on the radio. I have to feel it for me and for you if you're listening. And I have to feel it for my children. I have black children, I have black sons. I have to feel it for my family. I have to feel it for our listeners who are not white. I have to feel it for our listeners who are Hispanic and so forth, and really try to process it as best I can based on my limit. I'm not a Hispanic 16-year-old woman, so I don't know what the world looks like to her, but I have to try to imagine how to explain this to that person and everyone else. And so, you know, just some perspective. And I do think that it's very important that if you're out in the world and you come across someone who thinks that jokes are funny and they want to use this or that, or they want to get stuff like that off, it's okay to challenge that. And if you're a non-confrontational person, it's okay to challenge a person with a little bit of love in your voice. I try to do that, and I'm probably successful maybe 8 times out of 10. Them last 2 times, I'm bringing that smoke, you know, because I got that too. But it's there, you know, and, you know, again, together, we're going to help stomp this out and keep it stomped out. You know, in my belief, we're moving in the right direction. You know, Q constantly reminds me that we have a long way to go, but this is progress, and you know, we're doing our part here. So moving on, athletes banned from wearing BLM apparel or taking a knee or raising a fist at the Tokyo Olympics. Q, how do you feel about that?
I pause sometimes and forget that our listeners aren't looking at us, because if they could see my face, you know what I mean? Like, it's, my facial expression is saying a lot. They could have. Okay, so this is what I think happens now moving forward from their statement and their stance on this. They've made villains out of anyone who would take a knee or raise a fist or simply say or wear a t-shirt or a wristband or a headband or a hat or anything that Black Lives Matter. The IOC would have been better off just not saying anything.
What's IOC?
I don't want to say this incorrectly. So let me make sure that I'm...
Is that like a something to do with the Olympics?
The International Olympic Committee.
Okay.
Because now you've put a person in a position to feel they have to push back.
Right.
As a person representing this country, especially a black person, be it as an Olympic athlete or a member of our military, there has always been this idea that I'm going to go out here and fight for and or compete for this country that does not love me. And somehow you're looked at funny when you're the person making that statement, not all of the people that prove it to be true. So you can come home wearing the stars and stripes and a gold medal and a military uniform, all of it. And people are still going to see first and foremost your skin color.
Yeah, we saw that officer get pulled out of his... You got pepper sprayed. The dog got pepper sprayed. He got pulled out of his brand new Jeep. Might have been 3-4 weeks ago. He was in full military get up. So,
yes.
Yeah, we know that.
So you're now putting these people in you're already in a position when you're black and you're representing the United States on a world stage. Now you have the IOC saying, don't you dare come here with that black people deserve to exist stuff. Don't you dare. And now as an athlete or an ally, as a black athlete or an ally, even if you're not from this country, you have to arrive at the Olympics with tension that's now extra, that wouldn't have been. Right? There's a certain amount of attention that exists, period, if you look like us. But now they've gone out in front of everyone and said, don't you dare again come here with that black people deserve to exist nonsense. And our athletes who are already competing on behalf of a country that does not love them have to go there essentially being told to shut up about how they feel about the things that are going on in this country and around the world.
It's so interesting that they would make a move to silence a movement that has been, in my estimation, very fruitful.
I mean, it's a, I always speak to the statement because people try to find a way to make the movement something political or negative, even if it is political. The idea that black people should be able to not get murdered for just being black should not be controversial, even if you do consider it political, right? But the idea that you're gonna make your stance that you better not say, show anything with regards to that puts people in a really rough position. And I'm curious to see if they're going to get some pushback from athletes that they probably wouldn't have otherwise.
So that's what I was thinking. I love stuff like this. Well, I don't love it, but like, I know me, and I know that I would rise to the occasion. I would go there and just do it anyway, and they would have to strip me of my medals, and I would do it in front of everybody. And then when I got all the interviews afterward, I would let everyone know how hypocritical they were, I think that would be the play I would make, at least. So I'm hoping that the athletes, especially the black athletes, but all athletes, allies,
I'm hoping
and so
some
forth.
Non-black athletes.
Yeah, that really says a lot.
Because it's about time.
Yeah, and that's another thing. A lot of white folks, a lot of Hispanic folks, Native folks, etc. Whenever y'all stand up for black folks, it looks and feels very special, and that's why we know what that's like, and we try to reciprocate as often as we can. So, we gotta switch gears here for a second. So if you're just tuning in to Civic Cipher, I'm your host, Ramses Ja.
They call me Q Ward, but it's kind of like an abbreviation of my full name, Quinton Ward. So it's kind of, cooler, shorter, easier to say. That's how we got there.
That'll work. And if you haven't heard, something that came across our desk, forgive me, I forgot who sent this our way, but I'm sure it was a listener. But another thing worth talking about, or at least worth mentioning, there's a lot of folks that say, this is a post-racist society. We have a vice president woman who is, and then we had a black president. Let's not, and I think that a lot of those folks don't recognize that, cultural insensitivities is another part of, or it's kind of like the, what's the word I'm looking for? It's a byproduct of racism. People can be racist and not know it. It could be deep down on the inside and they just harbor prejudices, and without critical examination of their own selves, they'll never know it, because they're like, well, I would never hurt anybody just because they look different from me. And they think that's it. They don't recognize that they're a part of a system and that their apathy serves where they don't recognize that, there are some benefits, or at least some disadvantages for not being white, and for them to view the world as it is and think that everything is okay because, well, I don't do that, so everything is fine, is enough for them to tell themselves that they're not racist. But to those people, I have an example here that I think illustrates to another degree that we're not in a post-racial society, and that cultural sensitivities definitely are worth considering when you're trying to, draw those sorts of conclusions. Minnesota, let me take you there again.
We need to get an apartment there,
son. Really? So there's a high school senior. He's wanting to go to prom, and there's these really grand prom gestures. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time talking about this. I just thought it was worth mentioning. But the high school seniors, it's like a marriage proposal, but they get to have fun with it, and they're in high school, so it's really, all bets are off. And then in the TikTok generation, everybody gets to do everything in hopes that it goes viral. Well, this kid went viral for probably some reasons that his parents, or maybe his parents do agree with, who knows. But what he did was he wrote a sign for his prom date, and the sign read, and I quote, "If I was black, I'd be picking cotton, but I'm white, so I'm picking you for prom." And there's a lot that you have to consider, again, when thinking of that. We haven't even begun to talk about systemic racism. We haven't even begun to talk about real disparities in political representation in terms of, the judicial system and criminal, the criminal justice system and those outcomes and so forth. We're talking about teasing and words and things like this, right? Because a lot of times that's easier for people to understand, right? But that's just a very thin surface level representative layer, if you will, of everything that is below it. But this is worth mentioning because there are people who would say, well, it's harmless if you don't feed into it. It's just a kid. He did a stupid thing. He thought he was making a joke and blah, blah, blah. But to me, I look at a society. I look at a family. I look at a group of friends, and I look at a culture. Granted, this is Minnesota, but there's a culture that exists there and in the society at large that is really more exclusive to white folks than anyone, where stuff like this is totally fine, which is why this child was able to live, I'm assuming 17, 18 years, and think that this was not only okay, but funny. And they don't recognize how exceptionally offensive it is. They don't recognize the human cost of that joke. There were people their whole lives.
I don't want to cut you off.
Oh, good.
But the sad part is, to that kid, there is no human cost.
Right. There's no education.
He doesn't have friends that look like us, clearly. Mm-hmm. Not actual friends. He might have classmates. He might even have kids that he hangs out with and plays basketball or whatever. But he doesn't have friends like us. Mm-hmm. So there's no one that he cares about that'll be hurt by that. And it's not an off-the-cuff thing he said without thinking. He made a sign.
Yeah, colors and...
He designed a sign,
yeah.
Put it in a car or on a bike, and took it somewhere for this person to see it, and then presented it to them. There's so many moments where this could have been like, no, this isn't a good idea. Mine never went there. In his mind, it was absolutely hilarious.
He's gonna get this off.
And when he gets it off, everyone's gonna talk about how funny he is.
Right. So I think that what we have here is more a reflection of, let's start with education. Because, when the previous administration was in office, there was this big push to dilute education. I know this is true in Texas. They teach slavery, since that's what we're talking about, picking cotton. They teach slavery now as workers were brought over from Africa, as opposed to slaves were brought to, work in fields.
Kidnapped, tortured, murdered.
And then because of the economics of it, then it ended up, really taking its toll. And then, we've studied this, that the people in Africa that did participate in the slave trade had no idea what they were selling their country folk into. Because the forms of slavery that existed in Africa were very different. You could conquer a tribe and then you incorporate them into your tribe, and that's that. But they work, and then after a while, it's like indentured servitude or something, like you can pay for your freedom eventually or whatever. But there was nothing like, okay, we're going to change your name, we're going to take your language, you can't practice your religion, we're going to beat you, we're going to bury you, we're going to rip you apart by horses to subjugate you. We're going to rape you,
murder you when we feel like it.
Yeah, all these sorts of things, and then we're going to systemically oppress you and economically make sure that you're disadvantaged for hundreds of years thereafter, so that you have no real chance at self-determination. That's a whole different thing that no one knew about. But anyway, I digress. When you take education out of schools and you don't really give people what it is they need, which is, again, a reflection of a racist society, a society that doesn't want to deal with it because either A, they think it's fine, or B, they don't want to face it, which I think that are both.
C, all of the above.
Exactly. So we're not in a post-racial society, especially if we haven't dealt with the racism that we're still dealing with, right? But when you don't teach these people this, when you take it out of school, I think in Arizona, where Q and I live, there's some legislation that's being voted on now, where if they teach one side of history, that now they have to teach the other side. It's of course a Republican initiative, because those people tend to be the people that don't really want to come to terms with their past and their role in society. By and large, in shaping modern society. So that means that if they teach the Holocaust, that, the Jews were murdered by the millions by the Germans, they also have to teach the other side of the Holocaust, which somehow is the why.
I'd love to hear what the other side of that sounds like.
And but the thing is, these rules weren't written for the Holocaust. They were written so that you could teach two sides to slavery. The Holocaust is the big hang up, because everybody agrees across the board that, the Holocaust was bad. But in this country, we don't mind dealing with what happened in Germany. We don't want to deal with what happened here. So they wanted to teach slavery like, slaves, some of the slaves loved their masters physically or whatever. Sorry, that might have been too graphic, but they want to teach it like that.
There's a thing in addition to Stockholm syndrome. If you Google Stockholm, you'll see where that term came from, where it was born, and apply that same rhetoric to what happened to slaves who did, in some cases, end up loving their captors.
We call that Uncle Tom. We call that a lot of stuff. But for the most part, there is no two sides. We're very well informed as to what happened, but this initiative is to deny the youth of, that knowledge, so that in their belief that if they don't know what happened, then everybody gets along better. And the truth is, I think that by coming to terms with it, we can really understand where we are and why we're at different places in society, and that we stop blaming each other in terms of like our character. We stop blaming, we stop using excuses like, well, you should pull up yourselves by your bootstraps, and we really start examining critically the systems that are built into place that reinforce white supremacy in today's society. And it starts with all of the sins that America has committed.
Shouts to capitalism. I always have to shout capitalism out for the role it plays in sustaining a system built on the foundation of white supremacy.
So yeah, that's enough about that Minnesota stuff. Now we can talk about some stuff that sucks.
I was waiting to see if there was a colloquialism for that.
No, man, it just sucks.
And sucks really hit the nail on the head.
So another publication that we read around here is the Atlanta Black Star. It's a publication that's really dedicated to, black news, sharing stories that, might not be carried on your CNNs, and, Fox News, of course, wouldn't carry anything in the Atlanta Black Star, but just critical examinations of things that happen around the country that really affect black folks, and so that we understand what's going on in Black America. And a lot of these stories, of course, like I said, they won't make it to the news cycle that you're accustomed to seeing in your weekly or daily newsfeed. So this story is about a Baton Rouge police officer named Jeremiah Ardain, I believe. So it's a story about police corruption, by the way. So Jeremiah Ardain is a black officer. Again, Baton Rouge, Louisiana Police Department. That's a big city in the United States. He worked in the Narcotics division, and ultimately he became a whistleblower. Now, I'm pretty sure that everyone knows that if you're a police officer, there's this blue wall of silence where you don't tell on other police officers when they don't do their job correctly, right?
You don't tell on other police officers when they break the law, you mean?
That's what I mean.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But
sometimes I stutter, so I didn't.
No, you got it right. Yeah. So, but yeah, they just, if they see something, they just protect them. They protect each other, right? Which is why a lot of these officers, when they do ultimately have to, like the Derek Chauvin trial, the person who murdered George Floyd, I believe he had like 19 complaints filed against him in, I think, 18 years or something, or something ridiculous, which they were all able to submit in court to show that this officer was consistently operating beyond the scope of his job description, and causing harm to people, and so much so to where they would complain about him, which suggests that there was probably hundreds that didn't even get to that point, right? Just to, whatever. But, we never hear about it because these police protect themselves and they protect each other. So this guy decides that he's not going to stand for it, this Jeremiah Ardain, this black officer, and he blows the whistle about a corrupt narcotics division, again, which he worked for. And his whistleblowing, ultimately, there's two stories happening simultaneously here, but the whistleblowing part of this ultimately resulted in 700 criminal cases getting thrown out. Could you imagine? I didn't say 7. I didn't say 100. I said 700. And then they said, I think there's an estimated 1,600 more potentially that can get thrown out. And there's hundreds more cases that have been tainted because these people would plant drugs on people. They would falsify documents. They would lie to, with each other to put people on the scene. They would do all kinds of stuff to, either trump up charges or get folks who had nothing to do with it wrapped up in some nonsense or whatever the case is. Hundreds of times. And if everything ends up panning out, it'll be literally thousands of times. And of course, we are aware that the war on drugs was launched initially to criminalize black people, specifically the Black Power movement.
Sick black people too.
And hippies, right? So my belief is that this narcotics division in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, overwhelmingly interacted with and convicted black people by an order of magnitude, I would imagine, right? So now I don't have hard numbers on that. That's speculation, but I mean, it's safe to assume, again, this is Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and it's a narcotics division, and I know the country I live in, and I've been to Baton Rouge. Actually, we both have. So we know what we're talking about there. Anyway, and then ultimately, because he was the whistleblower, they set him up. And you want to hear the way they set him up?
Please.
You're going to love this. So someone reached out to him saying, hey, do you want to buy some electronics for a really cheap price, like a TV and whatever? I'm selling a TV and a video camera, something like that. He's like, yeah, man, of course. That cheap? Let me buy it. Right? Goes to meet the person, buys it. Turns out it's stolen. Boom, they arrest him. He's like, yo, I had no idea it was stolen.
Because he knew it was stolen.
Yeah. And then he's like, well, clearly it's a setup. So now this officer is in jail for buying stuff. So he's in the criminal justice system now because of that. And now the police can exact their revenge from their former narcotics partner. So to everyone that still supports, the police need our support, they're heroes and this, that, and the other. And granted, this is one example. But I'm from Compton, California. I've interacted with the LAPD. That's another example. I've interacted with the Phoenix Police Department. The only time in my life I've ever had a gun pulled on me. Looked down a barrel of a gun. Actually, lots of guns. Phoenix Police Department. Police have never been the heroes in my story.
And do you know how overwhelmingly obvious the evidence had to be against those officers for cases to actually get thrown out?
Right.
And overturned.
Yeah. They were
for anybody
really
to even be convicted of anything and be told that they're either losing their job or for there to be any type of repudiation. The evidence had to be so overwhelming against them.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I say that it's such an interesting thing that, when people have this idea, police are heroes, they keep us safe and this and that and the other. And I get it. I do get it. If you don't know any better, if you read if you've been fed this propaganda your whole life and you've watched every movie and so forth, that's what you're taught to believe, right? But I know better. I know that they're public servants. I called the police. How about this? I called the police the other day. Excuse me. I was in a hit and run accident, right? Someone ran into the back of my car and then took off, right? Got his license plate. So boom, I'm calling the police.
I can almost guess what the police said to you when they arrived.
No, it was cool. It was cool. It was totally cool. But now I'm nervous, of course. I'm like, shoot, let me get somewhere, let me park, let me make sure that the door is open, that I'm visible, clearly, whatever. Officer showed up. Officer was super cool, right? But what he did was he showed up, took my story. I was on the phone with 911 first, because I was following the person that hit my car. I'm like, yo, he just ran into me. Described him. It was like a 90-year-old white male driving a Honda, ran into my car. Speaking of which, Farmers Insurance, I want my money. But yeah, the officer shows up. They told me not to follow the guy who ran into my car. They says, pull over, don't follow him. So I pulled over and they're like, we're going to send a unit out. Officer shows up. Officer takes my statement, shows me a iPad, says, is this the guy that ran into you? I says, yes, sir. That's the guy who ran into me. He's like, cool. Gives him his paperwork. He's like, all right, here you go. We're going to go to his house and blah, 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 and this, that, and the other. And that's it. No heroes there. He did a job, same as a bus driver. Same, you know what I'm saying? And so when you elevate, and I'm not saying, when I say the police have never been a hero in my story, I'm not saying they've always been the bad guy. I'm just saying that when we elevate them to heroes or to gods or whatever it is that we're obsessed with doing in this country, or at least half of the country is obsessed with doing, then it really leaves no room for them to be exactly what they are, which is a product of a flawed system. And granted, there's a lot of people who are really taking advantage of that, and some people who are just victims of it. They want to do a good job. They look, man, there's not a lot of people that are like, you know what? The reason I was born is to be a police officer. People, when they're little kids, I want to go to the NBA, I want to be an astronaut. Usually police officer is a little bit lower down on your list, right? It's a job.
Did you know I tried to be a police officer?
Did you?
3 times.
Really?
Yeah.
Talk to me.
Got in the best physical condition of my life. Mm-hmm. Took a physical, mm-hmm. took a written exam. Mm-hmm. And then they have this thing called an oral board review, where you sit in a room of officers. They present you with scenarios. You explain how you think you would respond because you haven't been trained, so you really have no idea. Mm-hmm. And then based off of that, they decide whether or not they're going to allow you to go to police academy. Okay. Now, our listeners don't know me, but you do. I was not able to become a police officer through the process you have to go through to become a police officer, with 3 separate departments in 3 different cities. I was not qualified. So imagine what the level of scrutiny should be if me, intelligent and educated, because those are not one and the same, fit, sound, kind, empathetic, I can say these things straight-faced about myself. When I sat in a room of officers, not fellow officers, because I'm not one, I was deemed. And they don't explain to you why. You don't get like a, hey, go work on this. No, you just never hear back, and you understand, okay, they passed on me. I went and tried it again. One department I tested twice, 2 separate departments I tested once, and was not able to become a cadet at an academy.
Thank God.
I bring that up because I've met officers that, okay, I'm not going to say that because there's no nice way to say it. I'll just say this. The level of scrutiny for our officers is much lower than it probably should be. I want you people to imagine if 25 times a year we found out that there were members of the fire department starting the fires every year. So let's say 2 stories a month, a member of the fire department sets an apartment building on fire. Several people die. How we would look at the members of our fire department.
Especially if they tried to cover it up for each other.
No, I'm talking about, yeah, of course. Yeah, there's way more than 25 fires. But we've seen on video every year them setting 25 buildings on fire.
Right.
And someone dies in each building. How we would react and how we would scrutinize and treat and view our firefighters.
Right.
Our police officers get a pass for what is relatively the same thing.
Yeah.
Just food for thought.
Well, one thing that I can say, though, is that, I get that it's a tough job. I get that it's a job.
It's also
no one's getting rich.
It's also voluntary.
Yeah, that too. And I get that, these people are not getting rich. So a lot of folks, they're like, look, man, I'm trying to take care of my family and this is what I could do. I was able to do it, so I'm trying to do it, right? But really what we've been critical of on this show is the system surrounding it. So I want that to be the primary takeaway from this. So yeah, with that said, if you're just tuning in to Civic Cipher, I'm your host, Ramses Ja.
They call me Q Ward.
And we want to talk about something that brought a little bit of joy into our lives, or my life. I'll talk about specifically. There was, for those that have HBO Max, Michael Che, who is he's the anchor on Saturday Night Live's Weekend Update.
Yeah, he's a writer, comedian, and cast member on Saturday Night Live. Yeah. And yes, the anchor on the Weekend Update.
Right. So Michael Che put out, I think it might have been 6-series episode on HBO Max. And I took an afternoon and watched all 6 of them. And I loved it. It was so funny. And I'll say it, this is an endorsement. I became a fan of Michael Che when he said in one of his stand-ups, he said he was being critical of the All Lives Matter movement, right? Because he said, he said, how is it that Black Lives Matter is a controversial statement? Like, do we not love each other? Do we not care? He's like, where's the bar? Do Black lives exist? Can we start there? Do Black lives exist even? Like, can we agree on that? We can't agree that they matter. Can we agree that they exist? And it's just such a refreshing look at it. And it really points out some of the hypocrisies in the all lives matter ideology, or lack thereof, So that, coupled with the fact that on Weekend Update, which I've watched quite a bit of over the past couple years, he is the guy that is able to kind of dig a little bit deeper when it comes to racial issues. When they're talking about Kanye, when they're talking about whatever. He's the guy that can kind of dig a little bit deeper and get the humor out of it, and it still be palatable and in line with, the culture of the show. Because Saturday Night Live, in my belief, is liberal leaning show. You know what I mean? I think anybody with a sense of humor is a little bit more liberal leaning. So I really have always loved his capacity to be able to get that out of there. But in his special that he put out, or his limited web series, one of the things that he talks about is, of course, he talks about police, policing. He talks about white allies and what it's like interacting with white allies, people who are very apologetic for the state of the world and are doing their best to try to bring some balance to it, but he deals with these things in a humorous way, and so for folks that, we appreciate you listening to our show, and we do recognize that we kind of have a serious tone here, but these are serious topics often. But if you want to get some additional perspective and also have some fun with some late night entertainment value to it, I highly recommend the show. And one thing that really stood out to me, and it's interesting that we were just talking about this with where we were talking about like policing as an institution, is that he really has to, in a couple of his skits or his short short skits, I think they're called, he has to talk about the fact that his brother is a police officer. And that really presents an interesting dynamic to what's happening on the show. And you have to think about that. There's a school of thought in the more radical liberal way of thinking, which states absolutely abolish the police entirely, right? We need to burn it down. We need to rethink what policing means in community safety, and we need to build it from the ground up, right? And I'm not going to say one way or another the merits of that. I would rather whoever is more informed about that come up and say that, but I will acknowledge that line of thinking absolutely exists. And then on the other side of it, there's people who say, well, we need the police. Let's give them all the money in the world because they're keeping us safe, as illustrated by the fact that I Karen am not dead yet, right? So, you know, and usually with things like this, we find that, you know, the truth is, or really the path forward, whether or not it's the truth, the path forward is somewhere in the middle. It's based on a compromise. Everybody gives a little bit, right? And then that's how we move forward. And so, if I was a betting man, I would bet that police are going to be with us, you know, moving into the future, which isn't something that is necessarily a bad thing, provided that we rethink what that means. You know, do we need a human being who's having a mental breakdown to be engaged by another person with a gun and a license to kill him? Or how do we rethink what that looks like? Or do we, you know, with the defunding the police, one of the things that I really like about that, at least when you get past the term defund the police, one of the things I like about the ideas is, well, let's take some of these funds from fortifying police departments and put those funds into the community so that we stop the crime from happening in the first place. If a lot of the crime comes from the homeless population, let's try to treat this like it's a separate thing. We don't need more police to control the homeless. We need less homeless, you know, which is on its face makes the most sense in the world. But because we're so trained and it's so ingrained in our society that we need police, that, you know, it's just the norm. And I think our impulse is to continue to fortify those institutions. And so the thing I love about Michael Che is he forces us, the viewer of his show, to live in a world where there are police officers and we are tied to the outcomes of those police officers' workday. Do they come home safe at the end of the day? Because, you know, this is his brother. He wants his brother to be safe, but also he has to recognize that, okay, well, policing as an institution overall is very harmful to us, even though there are black police officers, and that we don't believe all cops are. There's a term, ACAB, look it up. I don't want to get in trouble with the FCC, but you know, he would argue that, well, you might think all of them are, but I'm not going to call my brother that, you know. And it just makes you stop and take a look critically at, you know, what are we really doing? What do we really want as an outcome? And what's realistic in terms of those outcomes? Because again, more than likely our path forward is somewhere in the middle, you know, of those two extremes. And so that doesn't sound like, you know, good news, but I thought it was really great. And I really implore all of you to check it out, because if you're like me and you want a better tomorrow for yourself and your family and your future and your brothers and sisters that don't look like you, then, you know, it helps to, you know, continue to engage, but also to not overwhelm yourself. And I think that's a great way to do it. And so with that in mind, that's going to do it for us here on Civic Cipher today. You know, once again, I'm your host, Ramses Ja.
And I am Quinton.
Yes, indeed.
But y'all can call me Q.
Absolutely. And we would love for you to check out the website, civiccipher.com. On that website, you can submit topics for the show if you want us to discuss them. You can also donate. The show is growing, and it's your donations that are helping us grow, and we would love to continue to grow and bring this message to more folks. And also be sure to plug into all of our social media. It's all at Civic Cipher. And of course, you can download this and all previous episodes on civiccipher.com. Just hit the podcast. It's available on all podcasting platforms. And until next week, y'all.
Peace.
Peace.